All right, this is the Algebra 2, Unit 2, Lesson 3 video. This will be a short one. This lesson is just a very, very brief overview of what we call piecewise linear relations. A piecewise function is a function that has basically a different equation for different parts or different sections of the graph. And this little video kind of explains a little bit about that. But in like this graph, you can see that we have, depending on where we're looking on the graph, there's a different relationship. So here, this section of the graph, it goes up like this, and then from here to here, it stays along 0, and then from here to here it goes up, and so on. So this function doesn't have a single equation to describe it. I could not describe this function with just one linear equation. So this is actually what that one would be. Obviously, that's a very complicated one, but we're going to be working with piecewise functions that are a little bit more straightforward. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through one example that's actually probably more complicated than the examples that you're going to be dealing with. But this is an example, and the answer is already on the screen, but I want to kind of walk through how this works. So in a piecewise function, you have two main ideas going on. The first idea you have going on is what we would call the interval. So the interval is saying, for the part of the graph I'm looking at, in this case I'm looking at the red section of the graph, for the red section of the graph, what is the x values that are going into that? Okay, so again, this red line here is corresponding with this first interval here. And so the interval tells us where on the graph that is. So the red line is going from -3 to 1 on the graph. And you can see we're talking about the x values there. So from the x value, -3 to 1. And then on the other side of the table, you have the actual equation. Now in your unit, they're going to be putting equations in function notation. So this would be written like that. But it's the same exact idea. In other words, the red line graph is the graph of x, or -2x plus 5. Okay, so this is how these piecewise functions work. You're saying across this interval from -3 to 1, the graph of the line looks like the graph of -2x plus 5. But then in the next part, it says the following. Then from 1 to 3, the graph has a different function. The graph has the function 2x plus 1. So again, we're going just from there to there. And so this function here is the function 2x plus 1. It's the second row of our table. Again, it's going to be written like this in our unit. Then the line flattens out, and from 3 to 5, we have the graph having a different function. From 3 to 5, it stays at the number 7. So again, this interval is talking about the x values. Oops, sorry about that. Interval is talking about the x values. The equation is talking about the y values, the actual graph. But from 3 to 5, the line stays at 7. That's what's coming from right here on the x. Then the yellow part of the graph begins at 5 and goes all the way to 10. And that graph is the graph of -x plus 12. That's this line. Okay, so piecewise functions always have these components. There's going to be a table. It's going to have the interval. It's going to have the equation. So just to recap, the interval tells me where the graph is located. So in our first section, we have the graph -3 to 1. In our second section, we have 1 to 3. Then we have 3 to 5. And then we have 5 to 10. And then the equation describes the actual graph. What equation describes that graph as you go along? So let's go look at our lesson. In the lesson, they're going to be doing some really basic things. And they don't do a good job of explaining this, and they actually do it in a slightly different order. But I'll just explain. In this table, this is the function, or the y, and this is the interval over here. So I'll do the first one. So we already said that the first part of the equation has a value of 1, and that's because it stays along 1. What interval does it go from? It looks like, for me, it goes from -3 to 1. So we look down here, and we see we have -3 to 1 is answer choice C, because the graph goes along the value of 1 from -3 to -3 to -1. -3 to -1 is answer choice C. So then what you have to do is say, okay, what about the next interval? Well, the next interval has a value of 2. It stays along the 2. So I'll go ahead and do that part for you. And then you need to find the interval that matches that. What interval has a value of 2? It goes from -1 to 1. And then you go on and do the rest that way as well. Down at the bottom here, they've already given you most of the information filled in. You just need to determine what part of the graph from 0 to 2, what is the equation of the graph? From 0 to 2, what is the equation of the graph? So in other words, from here to here, what is the equation of the graph? It's right there. And then again, from 2 to 4. From 2 to 4, what is the equation of the graph? So you're just filling in the correct equation from the list below to match the equations of the different sections. And then you have a couple of vocabulary questions down at the bottom. So that's really it. And again, it's a very brief overview. So really just get that concept down of understanding the difference between the interval and the equation of a piecewise function.